All right. It is that glorious time of the year where you constantly have to refresh MajorLeagueTradeRumors.com.
You are Locked On MLB, your daily MLB podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, baseball fans. Welcome to Locked On MLB, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. This is the daily podcast. We talk about all of Major League Baseball. I am your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully. This episode is brought to you by SupplyHouse. SupplyHouse.com is the reliable way to get parts fast. Shop for your next plumbing, h-vac, or electrical job and get fast shipping from coast to coast at SupplyHouse.com. I had to do that right at the top because I gave another website a plug right at the top who was not a sponsor. But follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter and Instagram. I'm your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball on Twitter, Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. In the middle of the night last night, two things happened. The first real big trade of the trade season took place, and my guest was doing a live podcast. And here he is, coming in as our guest host my co-host, doing a crossover. It's Dane Gonzalez of Locked On Mariners. I saw the Randy Arozarena trade at midnight, and I saw you were live podcasting, and I'm like, what a badass. What a badass. Hey, Dane, what up? Oh, you're on mute.
Rookie mistake. Look, it's been all the podcasts in the last couple of days, Sully, or not even the last couple of days, really the last few hours here. Yeah, I mean, last night you got to keep in mind here. I also live in Toronto, right? I don't live in Seattle. I'm not covering the team locally here, so it was 12:30 at night my time, and we ended up podcasting around 1:30. And then I'm editing after that. I didn't get to bed last night until about 4 o'clock because of Jerry DiPoto and Justin Hollander. So my sleep schedule is out of whack. Me and more importantly, my wife here can blame Jerry DiPoto and Justin Hollander for that.
Well, there you go. By the way, let's go through our trivia question, which is Mariner related. The trivia question I had, and if anyone listens to this, was an everyday Sully. No surprise. Scott Hortsmeyer got it correct. The question was, in 1965, what established American League team made a pitch to move to Seattle? Do you know what the answer is, Dane?
Someone made a pitch to move to Seattle.
Yes. Actually, over the years, two established teams nearly moved, but in 1965, an established team nearly moved to Seattle.
No, I don't think I'm actually aware of that.
And later, they came this close to moving to New Orleans in the 1970s. And Scott Hortsmeyer got it right. The answer is the Cleveland Indians. The Cleveland Indians made a pitch for Seattle. I never knew that. Yep. Now, the team that got, this close, in fact, it was all but done, were the Chicago White Sox in the 1970s because of the Pilots fiasco when they for those of you who don't know this, a tiny bit of Seattle history lesson here. The city of Seattle was awarded with an expansion franchise to start in the 1971 season. But because the state of Missouri was about to sue Major League Baseball after the A's moved from Kansas City to Oakland, they need to get a team in Kansas City right away. So they moved up the expansion by 2 years. Instead of 71, it was going to be 69. That was the year, folks. And nice. And Seattle was not ready. They did not have the Sixth Stadium where they played was not ready. And the Seattle Pilots had a disastrous 1 year in 1960. Read the book Ball 4 if you want to know about that. They went to spring training not knowing where they were going to be playing. And midway through spring training, they became the Milwaukee Brewers because of someone named Bud Selig, and it was probably illegal. Seattle was going to sue the hell out of Major League Baseball. They worked out a deal to send the White Sox packing, and when that fell through, they were going to sue the hell out of Major League Baseball. And suddenly, and also after a move with the Giants almost moving to Toronto fell apart, magically there was another expansion.
Yeah, wow. And that's convenient.
And the Blue Jays and Mariners were born to avoid a lawsuit. But there you go. Cleveland, it was nearly the Seattle Indians. It was nearly the Seattle White Sox. And if the White Sox had done their proposed move to Milwaukee, the Pilots would never have moved to Milwaukee. So there you go. A lot of things happening. By the way, Jeff Cohen is an everyday Sully, and he says, can I get a let's go Mets? Sure, Jeff Cohen, let's go Mets. Okay, so let's do you know where you were and what you were doing? Dane Gonzalez, where were you and what were you doing when you saw the Mariners pulled off the deal for Randy Arozarena?
I was eating pizza rolls and playing video games. And I go on Twitter and I see the Mariners tweeted a trident emoji. And I'm like, well, that's weird. What's that all about? And then I scroll up and I see my buddy quote tweeted that with a gif of Randy Arozarena. Now, I knew my buddy really liked Randy, so I was like, okay, he's just guessing maybe, right? He's like, oh, he's hoping that it's Randy. Then I look at our group chat that we have, and all I see are just a bunch of messages, all caps, Randy. And so put two and two together. I got on the phone with my co-host Colby Patnode, and we got after it on the show right after that. Yeah.
So I talked to Big Game the other day about the fact that the Mariners have arguably the best pitching staff in baseball, certainly in the conversation for the deepest, and one of the worst lineups. And I said, I'm not a big stats expert, and I don't claim to be a GM, but I think they need a couple of hitters.
That's safe to say.
And I live by the credo, which is mediocre is better than bad.
Yes.
And yes, you could try to get a superstar, but if you at least remove some of the easy outs from the lineup and make it so someone actually will get a hit from time to time, maybe a run will squeeze in every once in a while. Maybe, just maybe.
Yeah, that's what we've been talking about this whole time leading up to this trade deadline. Because look, at this point, the entire offense is a disaster. Every single player from top to bottom has not lived up to expectations. Right? And then, Julio starts to get it together and then he gets hurt. Right. It's just when it rains, it pours with this team. They have been awful. They are on pace in several categories to be the worst offense the Mariners have ever fielded in team history. And think about that. This is a team that has made the playoffs 5 times in its history, has never made a World Series.
Ever.
And this team specifically has arguably the worst offense it's ever rolled out in its 40-plus year history.
And I am looking back to the days, I remember the days of Alvin Davis, Harold Reynolds, Ray Quinones, and Jim Presley being your infield and outfield, Danny Tarble, Phil Bradley, and Henry Cotto with Scott Bradley behind the plate. And some combination, there was always some veteran at DH, whether it was Gary Matthews or Jeffrey Leonard or Willie Horton. Mm-hmm. There was always some Gorman Thomas was there. There was always some rotation. Steve Bye-Bye Balboni was that was always like, well, when in doubt, hire a broken down clubber. But yeah, and as I said the other day, there is a opportunity this year. Yes. There isn't a super team in the American League. Baltimore's very good, but they're stumbling and bumbling. The fact that the Yankees, who have played, only the White Sox have played worse than them in the last couple of months, are still only a couple of games out of first place, just shows you how bad Baltimore's been playing. Cleveland's been up and down. Houston's been up and down. Minnesota's been up and down. Tampa's selling. Toronto's going to be selling. And we've seen that pitching depth is the key in the postseason.
Yeah.
Get in this playoff, and I give the Mariners as much of a chance as anybody to win the pennant.
Right. And that's why there was no question about what they should do at the deadline, even with how poorly they played, even with going 9-20 over their last 29, blowing a 10-game lead in the division at record pace, even with all of those things that have happened, even after losing JP Crawford and losing Julio Rodriguez over the last few days and getting swept for the first time all year, and it comes at the hands of the terrible Angels, right? Even after all of that, you still had to add, right? Because, I mean, one, I think Scott Service is managing for his job right now. Yes. I think Jerry DiPoto and Justin Hollander, there's a decent chance that they're working for their jobs right now, for their futures in Seattle.
Right.
And you have essentially what is the equivalent of the great quarterback on a rookie contract with this pitching staff. And you don't know how many bites of the apple you're going to get with them after this year. You don't know if you're going to get another bite at the apple with them because you don't know about health. You don't know if, one of these guys is just suddenly going to fall off a cliff. They might end up trading Luis Castillo here in the next year or two. Like, we just don't know. So you need to take advantage of this while you can, even with all the issues of this offense, because like you said, right, it's better to be mediocre than bad, right? You're not going to fix the offense, but can you at least manage it?
Well, when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the trade, the multiple trades that happened, and why I think they did it at the right time. Mm-hmm. Today's episode of Locked On MLB is brought to you by Booking.com, or as I like to call it, Booking.yeah. I went on a fantastic baseball trip earlier this year. I went to the city of Buffalo, which, by the way, is a really beautiful city. And I went to see a Bison's game there, traveled to Syracuse, saw a Syracuse Mets game, and on I went to Cooperstown and spent 2 magical days at the Baseball Hall of Fame. And each place I stayed, I went and got the best place through Booking.com. A great downtown hotel in Buffalo, a nice, safe hotel right nearby the campus in Syracuse, and a beautiful inn within walking distance of the lake and the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. And no matter where I went, I got my deal through Booking.com. From hotels that overlook stadiums to family-friendly resorts, Booking.com has so many choices across the U.S. for your summer travel plans this baseball season. The right stay can make you the fan of any city, even your rivals. Book today on Booking.com or on the site or maybe even on the app. Booking.com, more like Booking.yeah. Let's hear from our friends over at FanDuel. Look, I love sports. I love it when you got all sorts of sports. Earlier this summer, we had all the basketball and all the hockey you could want. Now we're going to have all the Olympics. And the sports are just sports in the way I love it. FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus. That's right. There's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. Head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel is an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Hey, where is your hub for all your sports news? I think you should make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 streaming channel programmed to bring you the biggest sports stories out there. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channel app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. All right, Dane Gonzalez, we're talking about the Randy Arozarena trade, the Yimi Garcia trade. I want to just say my point up first, and I'll shut up and let you yap about it. I think they're getting Arozarena at the right time. He had a horrible start, and I think some of his bad stats, you look at, oh man, he's having a rotten year. But you saw he's starting to heat up. He certainly had a great series against the Yankees, but a lot of players seem to have great series against the Yankees this year. But you're starting to see that maybe he is correcting himself to be the back of the baseball card that we're normally expecting for Randy Arozarena. And we've also seen he doesn't shy from the big stage. So I think that this is, if nothing else, it's a jolt to the team that says, we believe in you, go get him, Tiger. And I think that's no small thing.
No, and I think that, that's absolutely right on the head right there with that analysis. Like, this team has probably endured its worst stretch of just bad vibes under Scott's service in the 9 years that service has been over the last few days, because one of the clubhouse favorites in Ty France just got DFA'd. JP Crawford goes down with the injury. That's their captain of their team. Julio obviously lands on the IL. They get swept by the Angels. The vibes were terrible. And then you have a bunch of these guys that are coming up from AAA Tacoma, and they're going, what the hell is going on here? Like, we can't fix this. Like, what do you expect us to do in this situation? So they needed to get someone that brings energy. Randy's one of those guys. Randy's top 5 in baseball in terms of just energy, right?
Yeah.
They needed someone that can be kind of a clubhouse guy that can refresh the clubhouse, essentially. And on top of that, yeah, they need a guy that's hitting right now, because they just don't really have anyone that's doing that at the moment. And yeah, like you mentioned, it was a rough start to the year for Randy, but since the start of June, and really June 14th is when he really flipped the switch, he's been one of the best hitters on the planet. 293, right. 396, 560. I'm looking at the numbers here. 7 home runs during that time. The Mariners need that, especially the power. No one's hitting for power in the Mariners lineup right now. So they needed the power, and it didn't really matter where it came from. And he's also not striking out a ton, which has been a massive problem for the Mariners, despite them going into the offseason saying we need to cut down on the strikeouts. And then they ended up striking out even more, despite adding guys who have historically not struck out. So that kind of comes to my ultimate point here, is that Jorge Polanco made a lot of sense. Mitch Garver made a lot of sense. Last year, Teoscar Hernandez made a lot of sense. Colton Wong made a lot of sense. All these guys made a ton of sense on paper, and they were coming off of good years. I'm just not going to assume anymore, because something happens with these guys once they get to Seattle. Obviously, the ballpark is very hard to hit at. The batter's eye is very clearly an issue because it's angled, all that stuff. So all I'll say is, like, on paper, this makes a ton of sense for the Mariners. Randy should hit. Randy should be a significant difference maker for this team. They need to do more, and we'll get into that in a second here. I think we're going to be talking a bit more about what's next for them, but
right,
it should work. This should help things. And again, it's about managing the problem, right? Because you're not going to fix the problem. You're not going to bring in 9 new guys at the deadline. But what's really important here is that he has 2.5 years left of club control. So if this thing continues to go sideways, okay, I get him for next year, and I'm going to have to overhaul the offense this winter. So I at least get some of that work done now.
Right. Well, one of the things, and I bring this up all the time, but I think I think this is a great template, is when Atlanta, and fans of the show know where I'm going with this, but when Atlanta lost their entire outfield in the middle of the 2021 season, they didn't go trade for Mike Trout, Shohei Ohtani, and Aaron Judge. They brought in Jock Peterson, Jorge Soler, and Eddie Rosario, 3 major leaguers. They weren't superstars, but when you looked out in their outfield, you saw there were 3 major leaguers out there. Now, it just happened that it worked out in a way that you would ask a genie for, and that is they all came up big. But sometimes just making sure that, okay, do we have to worry about that position? None of them were going to be as good as Ronald Acuna. None of them were going to be as good as Ozuna, but you knew there was a good player there. The Mariners are in a spot where we just put a decent body out there and see how that sort of that chain reaction happened. The other acquisition that I always bring up is when the Giants traded for Marco Scutaro back in 2012, there were a ton of trades that were being made that year. No one would have earmarked the Marco Scutaro trade as being what was going to be the biggest deal of that trade deadline, but it turned out to be because of the chain reaction of having him in that lineup, what he was able to do, how he sparked the team both defensively but also filled that hole and allowed some of the other players to fill their roles. And he wound up being the NLCS MVP and probably would have been the World Series MVP if not for Pablo Sandoval.
Right. And like you were saying earlier, like this team needed someone to tell them, we still believe in you.
Right.
And that's been such an issue over the last couple of years, right? Like last year, we heard Paul Sewald talk about this and Cal Raleigh talk about this, about how disappointed they were with the offseason leading into 2023. And they felt that the front office didn't do enough to support them after ending the drought, making the playoffs, winning a playoff series, all that. And then the season ended and guys started to speak out again, and they talked about like the Rangers who won the division there in their home ballpark. And they were like, well, look what they did. Look at how much money they spent and how they supported their ball club. Like, we want our front office to do that. Okay, well, now the front office is starting to do that, right? They still need to do more at the deadline. This is not, this cannot be over. They cannot just call it good with Jimmy Garcia and Randy Arozarena and like, that's it. They still need to do more. But this is finally them saying, okay, we think we can win the division still, and we're going to support you. And so that's what Randy Arozarena here signifies.
Yesterday, I suggested they go after Vladdy Jr. And I guess one of my other commenters said the same thing, where it was at Space Magic Storm, whose comments last says making big moves, whatever they're still trying to play. Look, I don't know, and you don't know anything on this, but I still think whether it's Vladdy or someone like that, it's kind of like to get to put two big bats in there, to sort of spark this team. I think will give them a nice charge.
Yeah, I am under the impression that they really want Vladimir Guerrero Jr. It just comes down to the Blue Jays' willingness to do it. And what makes this awkward is like Ross Atkins and Mark Shapiro, they're still there in Toronto, right? Are they actually going to trade the face of the franchise knowing that they're probably getting fired this winter? And does Rogers, the ownership, trust them to make that move, that franchise altering move, right?
What else are they going to do?
Well, and also keep in mind here, like the Blue Jays are a bit different than all 29 other teams because they're not just a city's team. They're an entire country's team. And Vlad Jr. is the face of an entire country's team, right? Are they really ready to call it quits on the guy who's 26 years old still has another year left of club control and a year in which you were trying to compete? Like, I totally get it. And as a Mariners fan, I hope they say, yeah, we do want to trade Vlad Jr. in the next 4 days, right? And I hope he comes to Seattle, because that would be a massive, massive, massive shift. And not just the ALS, but the American League in general and Major League Baseball in general, frankly, if they're able to add Vlad Jr. on top of Randy Arozarena. I think they really want to try and get that done. We'll see if it happens. I know they're also trying to look at some other first base options. Yandy Diaz is a guy that got thrown out today by Mark Feinstein as an option for them, along with the Astros and the Rangers and the Pirates. So we'll see if maybe they work on that. Obviously, they just got a deal done with the Rays for Arozarena. So like they already know what the Rays like, right? They've already had discussions on that. So I think they're just kind of exploring other options. And then there's also Ryan Mountcastle, who the Orioles are apparently willing to trade. They've already traded Austin Hayes, so they're willing to trade guys off of their major league roster. Yeah,
and a fan favorite and a beloved clubhouse guy. They want him trading. Look, I may want him being the right thing to do, but it struck me as a little bit weird. And you could always sign Jose Abreu. I mean, he's still floating around there. He's floating around. It costs you nothing. All right, Ty. When we come back, we're gonna wrap this up, and I'm going to talk about why this weekend is a huge weekend for the psyche of the Mariners. Order supplies from the website that's made for the skilled trades. Find thousands of parts from hundreds of brands in just a couple of clicks at SupplyHouse.com. SupplyHouse.com gives you 24/7 access to a huge selection of plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with fast delivery anywhere in the U.S. Need help with an order? Get industry-leading after-sales service from their friendly and knowledgeable customer support team, and talk to a real person every time. And there's great news for plumbers, technicians, and contractors. Being a pro has its perks. Trade industry professionals can join their free Trade Master program for free shipping and serious discounts on every order. Over 100,000 pros already trust the Trade Master program to deliver results. Apply for your membership today and get a competitive edge on every order at supplyhouse.com/TM. Save money and time when you order online. Order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies from supplyhouse.com. Real people, real service. This is a reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Now it's available on the Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channel app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channel app. By the way, Jeff Cohen, who's an everyday Sully, one of the biggest Met fans I know, I'm sure he's happy that J.D. Davis just hit a grand slam and the Mets are beating the Braves 7-2. And I know he says, "Can I get a let's go Mets?" All right, let's go Mets. Oh man, I was so wrong about the Mets. I was telling them to sell. Wow. I might as well
what a run they went on, right?
I thought it was one fluke good month. I said you can't turn down this chance in the seller's market, and they have put me in my place. Put me in my place. But
by the way, we got some news today on August 11th. Mets versus Mariners on Sunday Night Baseball. First time Mariners have been on Sunday Night Baseball in 8 years.
Wow. Well, there you go. Things are looking good. But Eflin has been traded to the Orioles from Baltimore, from Tampa. So Tampa is basically trading everything except the Rays floating in that tank in center field. This is why this is a big weekend for the Astros, for their psyche. The for Seattle, for their psyche, or maybe for the Astros for that matter. The Astros are playing Los Angeles. The Dodgers have found their mojo again after a first half where they won a lot of games, but there's something seemed a little off. They found their mojo again. They're winning. They beat up the Red Sox. They beat up the Giants. Things are clicking, and they're going to get Mookie Betts back. And now they're facing the Astros. If the Dodgers can beat up the Astros, the Mariners are playing a minor league team right now that plays in Chicago and wears White Sox uniforms. If the Mariners can't beat up a team that the 1962 Mets would look at and go, "Man, these guys suck." This is an opportunity to wake up in late July, to wake up on the morning of the trade deadline to say either we're tied for first or we're in first. And psychologically, that's got to be a good thing, especially after blowing the 10-game lead in. Right. They blew a 10-game lead in one day. I didn't think that was possible. Okay, I'm exaggerating slightly, but it sure seemed like it.
Yeah, the problem here, Sully, is that the entire Mariners offense think they're also wearing White Sox uniforms. So, yeah, and we got one more game of that in its entirety tonight. So we'll see how that goes. You know, Randy's going to be there tomorrow. Hopefully things look a little bit better on that front. But yeah, tonight's going to be quite the adventure. Yeah, I mean, it would be huge. Like they have to win at least 2 of 3. I mean, anything short of that is a disaster against this White Sox team. Yeah. So yeah, and then with the Astros playing the Dodgers, like you got to take advantage of that. I mean, they've only won one game on a day the Astros have lost since June 28th.
Wow. Jeez.
That was Sunday when they played the Astros and beat the Astros themselves.
It's unbelievable.
So they haven't won and gotten help from another team playing the Astros at the same time on the same day since June 28th. So that's 29 days ago. Yeah. Well,
I know Teoscar Hernandez was a Mariner for about an hour and a half. You should root for him big time. Like he has a trident on his hat right now. Right now, every single Mariner fan loves. They're singing Randy Newman. I love L.A. And I mean it. I really think that with this pitching staff, if the pitching staff continues to have this depth, and bringing Garcia again, that's not. I know he's not the second coming of Raleigh Fingers. But adding bullpen depth is also really, really smart. If this team makes the postseason, I give them a puncher's chance with anybody with pitching depth.
And we know what Randy's done in the playoffs historically. So now they have that guy on their side, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and look, as we saw with the Rangers last year, right? The Rangers were terrible for the final 2.5 months of the season, but they got in and they got hot for 2 weeks and they won a championship because of it. Like their bullpen was fine in the playoffs. It was a disaster for most of the year, but in the playoffs it was fine. So if this offense can just be fine for 2 weeks in October, assuming they get there, they can beat anyone.
There's a big difference though. There's a big difference. They had Bruce Bochy, and Bruce Bochy took the freaking Padres to the World Series. And he took 3 Giants teams, and each time he had to navigate their pitching staff, and he always knew which buttons to press. And he sometimes, people talk as if he had the 1995 Braves as his pitching staff. He certainly did when they won the first title. They had Lincecum, Kane, Bumgarner, Sanchez, Wilson, that incredibly deep bullpen. But Wilson was hurt for the second time round. Bumgarner was not in the rotation in the last 2. In fact, Bumgarner was a mop-up man in 2014. And they were starting Jake Peavy. They were starting
Ryan Vogelsong.
Ryan Vogelsong, Tim Hudson, who was no longer the Tim Hudson who borderline Hall of Famer with Oakland and Atlanta. And they had to have some combination of Santiago Casilla and Hunter Strickland. He had to mix and match. He knew how to do that with this Texas team last year. And it didn't stun me that when he saw Josh Sborz, who going into the World Series was tied with me for Major League saves, that he said, "Do you know what? I'm going to ride this guy. I know the stats say I got to pull him and bring this. No, I'm going to ride this guy." And it didn't stun me that when the guy was on the mound, it was some guy going, wait, who? Yep, that's Boch. So you hope that now Service hasn't really had the chance to do that, save for trying to bring in Robbie Ray as a closer in the playoffs.
Thanks, Sully. Appreciate it.
I don't remember if I paid the cable bill, but I remember that. It's my curse. Well, look, I want the Mariners to do well. I'm unabashed that I like this Mariners team, and I've always had a soft spot in my heart for the Mariners. And it brings us to today's trivia question, and it's a simple one. Don't you answer it, Ty Dane. Who hit the first home run in Seattle Major League history? Notice how I phrased that. Who hit the first home run in Seattle Major League history? Put the answer down here in YouTube or at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter or whatever the hell it's called now on Instagram. I'm your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball on Twitter, Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. Ty Dane, where can people follow your great show?
Yeah, you can check out the show on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. It's Locked On Mariners. Follow us on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me on Twitter at Ty Dane Gonzalez.
And as we're recording this, the Mariners have runners on second and third in the top of the first. That's a good sign.
Yeah,
did I just curse them? Did I just curse them?
Yeah, how are they going to come out of this with 0 runs?
Being positive and optimistic with the happy, smiling, always sunny in Seattle voice of Ty Dane Gonzalez. This has been a Locked On MLB, Locked On Mariners podcast crossover. I am your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully.